Please read the disclaimer here.
Hello, my good people. It's time to look at follow-ups that didn't live up to our expectations. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you might know about my sequels that are better than the original list I did a while back. And I'll say, it still holds up. Although there are some movies I wish I at least mentioned. But I did think about doing the opposite to that list ever since I finished it. So now it's time to do a dark reprise to sequels that are better than the original, in the form of the most disappointing sequels. First, I'll give the rules. 1, it has to be a sequel, no prequels or spin-offs or remakes. And unlike last time, I'll do any installment from a movie series, from the second and onward. Also, while I've seen sequels from before my time, heck, a lot of my favorite films are from before my time, I'll only include movie follow-ups that were released after my birth, late 90s, since even if I didn't watch them while they were new right away, at least I got to feel the disappointment and embarrassment of finding out the news in person. Keep in mind, while these movie sequels I found disappointing, doesn't mean they're the worst sequels of all time. If you disagree with my choices, that's fine. Just try to be civil about our differences. Anyways, on to the list. The Lego Movie 2. Now that I think about it, the Lego Movie series was kinda like the Shrek franchise of the 2010s, in terms of reputation and influence. Both had a great first movie that influenced a lot of CG animated films moving forward, and had a second one which was also praised, with some liking it even more than the first. The third one was generally considered disappointing, and the fourth one was considered better than the third, but not as good as the first two. However, that being said, the fourth one is technically the only true sequel since the first two are more spin-offs. Anyways, in my opinion, the second part was a disappointing follow-up that does away with the surprisingly smart writing of the first one in favor of more generic and questionable storytelling. I mean, the first one did a great job of poking fun and subverting tropes. However, I feel like here it was more like the characters pointing out how overused some tropes are and then doing them anyways, like saying, "Oh no, not another musical number," and then doing one, for example. The humor, while still having its funny moments, didn't feel as smart, and mostly leans more into being meta, which doesn't always work. Also, the references are kind of basically there's a lot of mentions and appearances from cameos from other films, including those that don't even have official Lego sets made of them, but they don't really make jokes about them or reference them in any meaningful way. They just kinda show up or mention them in dialogue and expect you to laugh. The first one had cameos, but at least they were used for humor, jokingly parodying some of them, or at the very least had official Lego minifigures made of them. I also feel like the movie adds confusion about how the whole world works, like how much control do the Lego people have outside of their dimension. Also, while I'm sure this wasn't the intent, I can see some people's point of view when saying that this movie could potentially be seen as shaming little boys for liking things they should be allowed to like. I mean, Rex is clearly a representation of a lot of things young boys are into, but then he's revealed to be the villain and acts like he's too tough for cute stuff. Hey, that rhymed.
It's low on the list because it's still better than other films I'm going to mention later, and it's still a passable movie.
But overall, I feel like not everything was awesome this time. Kingsman: The Golden Circle. Now, if you watched my top 10 dueling movies list from a while ago, which still has a copyright strike, I'll work on it, I briefly mentioned how Kingsman has a sequel, which I found disappointing, and I still hold on to that view. So yeah, not a huge fan of the follow-up, which is too bad since the first one was one of my favorite films of 2015, 2014 technically, but still. However, the sequel just failed to live up to its predecessor. Basically, it was a lot more over the top, but not really in a good way. I mean, just about every action scene plays out like the church massacre from the first one, and after a while, it gets tiring. The movie doesn't really subvert or play with tropes associated with the spy films, basically becoming the thing it once parodied lovingly. Now it feels a lot more generic. The story, I will give credit and say it does bring up an interesting conversation of drug problems and sympathy towards those who are addicted and have reason. But where the story falls flat is basically how it feels like a lesser James Bond instead of being its own thing, like the first, while taking influence, but still. And while the first one wasn't exactly down to earth, but The Golden Circle feels like it's too ridiculous to actually take seriously, including more ridiculous, over-the-top scenes, much more juvenile humor, and pointlessly gross scenes. I'll say the worst element for me was the new organization, the Statesmen. Basically, the filmmakers try to make these guys as awesome as possible. They actually show them better fighters than the Kingsmen, i.e. they kick their ass during their first confrontation, pick up the fight with some pub goers after Harry fails to beat them up like last time. Then they try to make them badass, but they're nothing more than annoying Western American stereotypes who do nothing but dress like cowboys, and they all talk in a southern accent. And play on things like baseball, and are even named after alcohol. Why? Why not name them after famous presidents or American landmarks or something? A lot of the Kingsmen members were named after characters from the King Arthur legends, and weren't depicted as stupid stereotypes of their country, i.e. we didn't see them having weapons based off crumpets or bad hygiene. Another thing is, the film constantly attempts to be like the first. I don't even mean some callbacks or story elements. I mean trying to constantly be like the first one, but more over the top. Like the bar fight scene again. Also, the legit shocking moment of Harry dying in the first one is rendered pointless because he's brought back to life, only to do nothing throughout most of the movie. Well, there goes any emotional impact that scene had. Also, the way he's brought back is just stupid for a movie like this. Magic goopy stuff? Really? Well, the film is still passable, I guess, since it has some good action sequences, and didn't have any major character assassinations. Metaphorically, I mean, it still technically kills off a lot of characters, including those who had potential to be even better in the sequel. It's still more of a bronze than a gold. Guardians of the Galaxy 2. As someone who really liked the first one, this one kinda underwhelmed me. For starters, the movie's humor, while it has its moments, felt really childish and juvenile. Case in point, the sensitive nipple jokes, the large poop talk, the Taserface name being compared to Scrotum Head, etc. The first one had its lowbrow moments, but I feel like I got more laughs than groans, while Volume 2 feels like I cringed more than laughed. Also, Drax, I liked him in the first one, but here he came off as kind of annoying and obnoxious. The story this time around wasn't as engaging since it was kind of all over the place with multiple characters trying to be in the spotlight. The tone is confused since we have these weirdly mean-spirited scenes mixed with 4th grade level humor, and for some reason the movie wants us to sympathize with Yondu, despite being a child abductor and abusive to his son. I mean, all of a sudden we're supposed to accept that he's a great father figure to Quill? Granted, the first one tried to imply he had some good intentions, but this movie treats him like he was a saint. I know this one is well liked by lots, and I'll be fair and say there are some good things about it. The soundtrack is still amazing, none of the main characters are derailed too much, Rocket is still my favorite, especially once you find out his backstory in the third one, and Baby Groot is pretty cute, but besides that, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 isn't something I'm hooked on. Okay, the Indiana Jones series was a great franchise. It had thrilling and exciting action, great characters, and are overall well-written stories with unique ideas. However, while the series was supposed to end with The Last Crusader, they thought that years later that Indy should have another go on the big screen. Did it work out? No, not really. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a massive letdown, with its bastardization of Indiana Jones into a grumpy old man who, while older than he was in the original series, shouldn't be this cliched old man with little to none of the charisma he had in the original trilogy. Yes, the actor was a little older at this point, so a different approach was necessary, but he comes off as a bitter old guy who was often played as a joke. The other returning characters aren't treated much better either. The new character Mutt Williams, who is an annoying and uninteresting new addition, had either retrending old story beats from the previous movies, example being Following Clues, but without the emotional connection, or just dropping potentially good ideas. The actual action sequences are laughable and ugly, with an over-reliance of CGI, moments that are just plain ridiculous, CGI monkeys, really? And the fact that the whole movie is our main characters trying to make sense of a madman's rambling, who doesn't have any attachment to our leads. And do I have to mention the infamous refrigerator scene? Yes, the original movies had our heroes survive things that probably would have killed them, but this just takes things to a whole new ridiculous level. I guess I should talk about the aliens. Yes, I agree, aliens do kind of feel out of place for something like Indiana Jones. I don't know, it just feels a little too science fiction for a franchise like this. So the film claims they're interdimensional beings, but they look like stereotypical aliens and even have a spaceship. Come on, they're aliens. Also, is the other explanation any less ridiculous? This has been talked about a lot before, but I think the backlash to this movie is justified, and it just reeks of 2008 dumb action movie, just with Indy slapped onto it. Technically, Dial of Destiny is a worse film overall, but let's be honest, how many of us had high hopes for it, especially considering who owns this franchise now? In a nutshell, this movie isn't even silver, let alone crystal, and will have you feeling like a numbskull. The filmmakers chose poorly. Shrek the Third. I'll admit, as a kid, I actually did like this one, but I've grown to realize that this isn't a good continuation to its predecessors. For starters, the villain is a major downgrade. Prince Charming works as a supporting character, not as the main antagonist. Also, his plan is incredibly idiotic. Like he expects to gain respect by killing Shrek on stage in front of people who love him. Yeah, I'm sure that will work. Also, the movie isn't aware about how dumb his plan is. I also feel the humor wasn't as well written as the first two. A lot more forced edge and crudeness instead of clever satire or smart humor. Yes, the first two had some lowbrow humor, but here it seems like it tries too hard to be gross. Another problem is the story has pointless subplots that add nothing. Puss and Donkey switch bodies, but this is only used for a few jokes and that's it. I had to talk more about it, but every bit of criticism I could give has practically been covered by just about every other YouTuber. Overall, they made a series that was a fantastic parody of fairy tales, and made it into something that appeals to only kids and does not have layers. Space Jam: A New Legacy. Let's get something out of the way. The first Space Jam is not an amazing movie. It has its funny and cute moments, but it's not really a masterpiece by any means. At the very least, it gives what it promises: the Looney Tunes playing basketball with Michael Jordan. Even though it's kind of a commercial, it does the most with its premise. Once a sequel was announced, I actually had high hopes for it, since they could have done something cool with a legacy sequel that holds a special place in the hearts of many for nostalgia. It had plenty of years to improve. It could have been something special, but no, instead we got a pointless cash grab with mediocre animation, poor writing, and Warner Brothers hypnotizing us to buy HBO Max. Basically, the movie shoved as many Warner Brothers property in our face as they could, recycled plot points from the first movie in worse ways, and basically gave up with the writing towards the end. I'll give you a brief synopsis. Long story, but the climax ends with Bugs doing a move that would cause him to glitch out of existence. The movie plays it up like he's gone for real. Do you really think they're gonna kill him off? It's not self-aware either, and then he shows up again fine sometimes later, with the only explanation being he's a cartoon so he can survive anything. Even though no, he's a part of the program and was deleted. But you don't even try to give a decent explanation and you expect us to just accept it. Found LeBron James to be a crappy actor, though he's a surprisingly decent voice actor, since the cartoon is more expressive, I guess, and his character wasn't really engaging. Also, I love how Pepe Le Pew wasn't in the movie for being too forceful, let's say, but the gang from A Clockwork Orange made a cameo. Just think about that. Honestly, this movie doesn't even make sense as a sequel, considering it goes against information that was established in the previous movie, i.e., the Looney Tunes apparently lived in the center of the Earth according to that film. But here they all live in some kind of weird Warner Brothers cyberspace, question mark? The years they had, the potential was absolutely wasted and not realized. Space Jam: A New Legacy isn't even 24 karat and is just despicable. Wonder Woman 1984, or how to disappoint thousands after making what helped the DCU become much more respected. Unfortunately, this sequel didn't really help matters for the DCU, and things have been looking kinda bleak for the superhero subgenre in general recently, with how there's been very few successful ones in recent memory. Anyways, from the opening scene, that dragged on for too long, and didn't really have any importance to the rest of the plot, I knew something was wrong. Anyways, the whole plot revolves around this wishing stone, which eventually leads to some dumb stuff. Case in point, how everybody in the world renounces their wishes because Wonder Woman told them to, even though there was probably some people who had legitimately good wishes and wouldn't give them up that easily. The movie tries to justify it by showing every wish people make a selfish one. Also, I don't get how the stone is able to make things appear out of thin air, but when Diana wishes for her boyfriend to come back from the dead, he comes back in another guy's body. Why not just bring him back in his original body? They could have avoided all this controversy. Which I'm not gonna talk too much about, but I'll say this. Our two main heroes probably should have been more considerate about this guy's body, considering he has no control of it and has been taken over. Anyone else think it would have been funny if Pasto literally turned into a stone once he asked to be the stone? Anyways, the movie doesn't really work as an action movie since there's a long period of time without action. Heck, Diana doesn't even become Wonder Woman again for at least half an hour. The first one did a better job balancing out character building and action. It doesn't really work as a character-driven film, since they aren't really as well written as the first time. And it doesn't work as an 80s throwback. The only parts of the movie that felt 80s were the mall scene and the gym scene due to the style, and maybe that scene where Steve is getting dressed. But besides that, the overall style doesn't really feel like the era it's supposed to take place in. The clothes are mostly stuff we wear today. Many of the locales lack that neon style coloring the advertising promised, and they feel like they could have been set now. There isn't any talk or mention of any popular movies of the time, and there isn't any 80s music used in the soundtrack. I'll be fair and say this movie isn't as bad as some others say. as there are some good things, like Cheetah is a good villain in my opinion, and it has some good moments here and there, but overall this isn't anything wonderful, and that's the truth. I wish it was better. Okay, I might be overdoing it. Toy Story 4. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. The third one felt like the final one and wrapped up the series perfectly, but alas, they got greedy. I tried to keep an open mind and wanted it to be good, but unfortunately, this turned out the way I was hoping it wouldn't. Basically, this pointless follow-up not only adds confusion on how toy sentience works, considering Forky is not a toy, so he shouldn't be alive, but it also flandernizes Buzz Lightyear into a moron who is overly reliant on his voice box, something he never did in any of the previous films. He was actually of decent intelligence. Even when he thought he was a real space ranger in the first one, he made smart decisions and good choices for the situations he thought he was in. But in this one, he's overly reliant on something he has no control over, and also doesn't make any good decisions on his own. But what really dethroned this movie was the ending. Woody gives up his family, basically. He's known for years and been through a lot together to live with someone he knew years ago and hasn't seen in a long time, who has basically changed into a different person at this point. Even if Bonnie isn't really playing with him much, he should still be with his family and friends. Also, he never gave up on Andy for not playing with him after all those years. The new characters, most of them, aren't anything to write home about, though Duke Kaboom is one of the better new characters. That being said, I feel like a lot of the old recurring characters are basically pushed to the side and are now nothing but minor comic reliefs. Heck, a majority of them do nothing but sit in the RV for the majority of the film. I'll admit I do kind of feel bad putting it on here since I did grow up with these characters and still love the franchise, but the fourth one wasn't needed. It felt like a pointless add-on that wasn't as adventurous or as well handling in its themes. Sorry to be a buzzkill. Okay, this is where the movies start getting legitimately stupid. It's time for me to pull out my rant juice. Jurassic World Dominion. More like Jurassic World Dumb Minion. Okay, that was lame. Anyways, this is how you end the Jurassic series? Really? The first Jurassic Park movie is amazing and one of the best I've seen. And I'll be honest, I liked The Lost World. Even without the nostalgia goggles, I'd say it's still a good follow-up. The Jurassic World trilogy, well, wasn't as good. It still had its moments. And some of the criticism for Fallen Kingdom wasn't warranted. Some of it was, but some of it wasn't. Anyways, though it's not a perfect movie by any means, it still felt like they cared and were trying to move the franchise forward. However, any potential that movie set up was thrown out the window, and by God did they fumble up badly. Even a lot of the biggest Jurassic Park fans have a hard time defending this one. For starters, the movie promises humans and dinosaurs coexisting, but the movie mostly takes place in the Dolomite Mountains. You know, where there's barely anybody there, so it found a way to recycle shit from the original movies by having the forest trekking. Heck, the dinosaurs themselves take a backseat and are surprisingly mostly story irrelevant. Instead, the movie focuses around giant locusts. Yeah, you heard me. Basically, our main villain, Dotson, who was a minor character in the first film, by the way, is said he genetically modified insects to destroy other people's crops. And do you even care? Also, this movie has some of the most blatant nostalgia pandering I've ever seen. These two are brought back just to remind people of the original film and bait people into thinking this movie's good, even though they're basically pointless to the story, and they even brought back the shaving cream can. Remember that? You remember? I will defend Maisie in Fallen Kingdom, since she was a little kid, and she was being sympathetic towards the dinosaurs. But in this movie, she's such a little brat. I feel bad for her actress since she's pretty good for her age, but is stuck with a crappy script. She doesn't have any regret or feel bad for the damage the dinosaurs have done, or even how she essentially made Owen and Claire have to throw their old lives away and abandon social contact. Instead, she's all like, you can't control me, I want to leave this place. Of course, the thing that everyone mentions when talking about this movie is the hand. It made sense in the first one for Owen to use the hand signaling for his raptors, since he's trained them since birth. But now every dino, even the wild ones who have never seen him before, listen to and obey the hand, which is so dumb. Heck, everybody does it at one point. Is it some kind of superpower he has? Huh? The final battle is also the worst this series has had. Not only is the final fight against the Gigantosaur, I think I pronounced that right, who, let's be honest, didn't really do anything wrong. All it did was briefly fight the T-Rex for some food. Yet the film acts like they have this big rivalry, and barely appears beforehand, yet they have this big epic fight where of course you just friggin' know the T-Rex is gonna pull out a victory. And honestly, I kinda feel bad for the Gigantosaur. It did nothing wrong, yet the movie treats its death like a cause for celebration. At least the previous Jurassic World antagonists had dinos that killed just for the fun of it. Also, the lighting is so dark at times that I can't tell who's who. There's more dumb stuff, like the retconning of Maisie's backstory, and how they have greedy, shady humans who exploit nature for the 6th times as villains, but I think I've made my point. Universal, please stop the series here, and let it go extinct with what little dignity it has left. Normally I'd list some dishonorable mentions here, but trust me, I could return to this subject someday, and number 1 needs more time to talk about than the others. Anyways, on to the number 1 pick! Okay, let me say something. All the movies on this list, while didn't live up to their predecessors, probably wouldn't make a top 10 worst sequels of all time list. However, this one, not only is it bad enough to be on a worst sequels list, but it was bad enough to absolutely destroy any hope I had for this series going forward. A movie I wanted to have a sequel to, by the way, but it even made me question if the first one was all that good. It's Ralph Breaks the Internet. Yes, you heard me. I don't care if this movie had mostly good reviews, though it's been getting some more backlash in later years. I've always despised this movie. Heck, even when I first saw it, I came out thinking, oh man, that was bad. Here's my IMDb rating as proof that my opinion wasn't shaped over time. Honestly, even the 3 out of 10 I gave it I'm starting to think might be too high. Heh. Which is a shame, because I really liked the first Wreck-It Ralph, but this dumpster fire destroyed just about everything that the first one had going for it. No longer does it feel like a love letter to video games. Instead, it feels like a commercial for various websites in a desperate attempt to be hip with the kids. Even though this movie was written by people who clearly have no knowledge about how stuff like YouTube works, you don't get paid from likes, the movie implies it's easy to become an internet sensation, shows the dark web, which could encourage some people to look it up, great message for kids by the way, and the moral is that it's okay to leave your responsibility because you're bored, which really feels like a slap in the face considering how Ralph in the first one worked so hard to give Vanellope respect in Sugar Rush. Now she's bored of it! Vanellope goes turbo in this movie 100%, even though the first movie made it clear how bad that is, and never called her out for it. Ralph is worried about her, though not because she wants to live in an online game, which is dangerous due to not being able to respawn outside of your own game. Also because the company who makes the game probably would see a copyrighted character and delete her from the services. But Ralph acts kinda jealous or something, and even unleashes a deadly virus which endangers the internet world, which this movie makes clear is full of sentient beings. I'm sorry, but that's an act of terrorism, and I would cut him out of my life after that if I was Vanellope. Even if he feels bad about it afterwards, he shouldn't be this easily forgiven. Because he endangered his own friend's life just so she could be friends with him. What the hell is wrong with him? There's so many plot holes in this movie that I'm surprised no one fell in one. Like how Ralph is able to leave the game even though last time when he left things got bad. And that's just one example. These aren't little nitpicks. These are fundamental story problems that the film is dumb enough not to notice. Seriously, did they forget about the first one and what happened when he left? This whole movie, it looks so unappealing too. The world of the internet is so bland and generic. Like the whole world is like a corporate and personality-less universe. Like it was made by a company first and not someone with imagination. Just look at how the Wii Shop channel or internet browser looks. But after being redesigned to look more corporate, the rampant product placement is laughable enough to put Michael Bay movies to shame. Every moment is showing off some website or the Oh My Disney scene where Disney just screams in your face, "Look how much stuff we own! You love the stuff! We own so much! Love us!" There's also more wrong with this movie, like how the friggin' emotional moment is probably one of the few funny scenes. Ralph's videos stink? Oh, you're really pulling on my heartstrings there. Or how Felix, who is my favorite character from the first one, being relegated to a plotline that happens off screen, which had more potential for humor and heart than the main story itself. But I guess Disney needed to push more advertisements and websites. No room for actual good stuff. But this movie could be covered in a full review someday. But the reason why it's number 1 is because I hoped for a sequel since I saw the first one. Sure, the story was well wrapped up, but there's a lot of potential for a movie series exploring video game worlds. But no! This movie damaged the name so much that even if they make a third one that's good, it won't be enough to make up for this garbage. If you told me years ago that I would be hoping that a trilogy for this movie never happens, I wouldn't believe you. But alas, this movie left a bad taste in my mouth. And I have to pretend this movie doesn't exist to enjoy the first one. Ralph Breaks the Internet. More like Ralph breaks anything that made this movie good. But I think you get my point. Sorry if I came off as overly negative in this video.
Trust me, I'll be more upbeat in my next top 10 list. Also, this video isn't meant to bash anybody, whether they've worked on any of these movies or are just fans. It's okay.
And that was my top 10 disappointing movie sequels. What did you think? I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.